Welcome to SOLIDWORKS ECAD Solutions, particularly SOLIDWORKS Electrical and Designing from Scratch. So this is me, quick introduction on who I am. My name is JP Emanuel. I'm a technical manager or industry process consultant and out of North America. Between myself and Thomas, the guy on the back end that I just mentioned, him and I cover all of North America from as far north in Canada all the way through Mexico from east to west. So again, if you have any questions afterwards, you can always reach out to me. My email address is on the screen right now. If you're unfamiliar with Dassault Systems and Dassault Systems SOLIDWORKS, there's a lot of different tools. Today we're going to be focusing on electrical, but as most of you probably already know, obviously SOLIDWORKS 3D CAD, but there's data management, there's CAM, and with all these tools combined, it can really help drive your designs and make your products and everything you're working towards just that much better, that more intelligent. So the typical design process that I see that I'm guilty of too from my past is going in, drawing our blocks, adding lines, adding text boxes, and trying to incorporate and add all this information onto the sheet graphically. Then, after the fact, I'm going in and I'm documenting everything via a spreadsheet, not connected to the software. And then finally, I still have to go back in or have one of my teammates go back in and second check and make sure everything looks correct, everything, all the wires are correct. Well, that cycle never really ends, right? Well, the SOLIDWORKS electrical difference, what do I mean by that? Well, what we can do is take a lot of that back end reporting and those design rule checks and bring it up front while we're doing our design. So that way we can, when we finish our project, we can generate those reports with just a few clicks of the mouse and we can move about our day. Now within SOLIDWORKS Electrical, there's what I like to call the key factor. No pun intended with the keyed connector here, but we have what's called the shared library. And it is essentially the manufacturer part library. And within each manufacturer part within the library, there's a lot of different ways we can capture information and show that information graphically. And we're going to be working with this a lot today because, again, we're starting from scratch in a brand new project. But just to give you an idea of the kind of information we're working with, in here we can see all the different types of metadata fields that we can include for this one particular manufacturer part, and then push that information to those symbols that we see on the right-hand side. Additionally, with SOLIDWORKS Electrical, most folks always ask the question about communicating to the 3D side. Well, in the case of this pump P2, we can see in the middle here that we have our component tree from SOLIDWORKS Electrical, and we have our component tree, the same component tree in the SOLIDWORKS Mechanical side. And now I can create that P2, that pump, in the electrical side, and when I need to insert that, I can simply select P2 and add it to my 3D assembly. Same thing goes for on the mechanical side. Maybe the mechanical engineer is the one who knows what kind of pump or motor needs to be added to the project. Well, they can go ahead and add that. And now on the electrical side, all I need to do is insert the symbol, the appropriate symbol that matches that particular part, that component. Now, you'll hear me say this a number of times today. I can almost guarantee there's a number of people on here who are just trying to, maybe they have SOLIDWORKS Electrical and they're just trying to get better at using the software. And I know my one of my sales friends here, his name is Joe, loves when I say this term, but garbage in, garbage out. I'm going to say it a whole bunch of times. You're going to hear me say it over and over again. But the better the information you put into the software, the better the reports, the better the design rules that you can pull out of the software. So keep that in mind as you're doing your designs. Yeah, you may only need one or two pieces of information, but if you got the whole spec sheet in front of you, you might as well just add it because it's going to help you in the long run. Because in retrospect, do we really want to create something that looks like this? Thought that was kind of funny. So what are we expecting to see here today? Well, I'm going to show you, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start a project from scratch. You know, I was a little nervous getting into this because I have a little bit of a kind of an idea what I'm going to go through in the software here, but you know, this is kind of just for the most part unscripted because you know what, that's how we're going to start most of the time when we're working with the software anyway, right? So I'm going to go ahead and use a template to start the project. We're going to go in and we're going to work with our libraries a little bit. Then we're going to get into some of the schematics and some of the intelligent functionality that we can take advantage of. And then finally, we'll go in and take a look at some of the deliverables that we have. All right, so as you can see, I do not have SOLIDWORKS Electrical open. We're going to go ahead and jump headfirst right into this. And hopefully Murphy's Law doesn't come back to bite me and something goes wrong. But that's what we're here to try and figure out. So right here, we have SOLIDWORKS Electrical open. And the first thing that happens is we get our projects manager. Now, in my case here, I have a lot of different projects I work on. But in your case, if you've never used the software before, you're not going to have anything in here. So what can we do? Well, we're going to have to go ahead and start a brand new project. And when we start that project, there's a few default templates that we can choose from. In the case of this, there's 4 of them. This one's a custom one that I've created myself, but I'm going to start with one that you might see when you open the software. So I'm going to choose this ANSI package here. I'm going to give it a new name. So I'm going to say start from scratch. And I can also go ahead and add descriptions. You know, when I hear the word scratch, I think of scratch golfer, which I am not a scratch golfer by any means, but just for all intents and purposes, we can add extra information in here as we need to. We'll let the software create all the tables for this particular project. And within just a couple seconds here, we now have our project open. So very basic project template that we have, and we're going to work with this template as we go with this software here today, and we're going to build on this project and create a new template at the very end. But just to kind of give you an overview of what you start with in this one is we have our project, we have a book, and we have our sheets. Now, is this the most ideal way to organize the project? Probably not. We probably want to add a little bit more information in here. So let's go ahead and add a couple folders, and we can call this one schematics, and we'll add another one for 3D assemblies, and let's add another one at the end here for spec sheets. So why did I create those? Well, I wanted to. Doesn't mean you have to, but this is just what I do for my projects and how I like to organize them. So one thing I'll do is immediately grab these 3 different sheets here, my line diagram, my power and control, and just simply drag and drop them into that particular folder. And now we have just kind of a basic idea of our document tree. Now, there's a few things that I want to do when I first start using the software as well, is start to think about where am I going with this project? What are some of the things that I know I'm going to want to do? Am I going to connect to 3D? And if that's the case, I may want to start thinking about adding my locations to my project. Now, what do I mean by that with locations? Well, inside of SOLIDWORKS Electrical, you have the ability to define different locations. Maybe I have 2 identical cabinets, and each of those cabinets, maybe they're in different sections of my overall project, my entire assembly. So we can go ahead and define different locations. So in this case here, I have my main one. I'm going to change the name from main electrical closet just to location 1. And now I can go ahead and select a new location. Now, if I have this particular location previously selected or highlighted and I select new location, it's going to give me a sub location. And if I select the project at the top, I can go ahead and create a location 2. Now, why did I do this? Why did I want to show you this?
JB.
Yes. Can you hear me?
It appears there's a couple of users who are having some audio issues. I just wanted to reiterate that the main webinar is being recorded. So if you're experiencing a few audio issues, which it seems most of us are not, but you will get a link to this recording afterwards that will have the complete audio.
Thank you, Thomas. So going back to our locations here, why did I want to create these right away? Well, if I'm working with a mechanical assembly, let's say it's a crane, for example, or even just a large assembly that has multiple racks, an automation industry kind of rack, typically those are broken up, and not everybody's working on the same assembly within that project, right? So why I set these up is because when I go and I want to add assemblies, now we can see that I can create sub-assemblies or solid assemblies that will connect to the 3D side based on those locations. So it just goes and helps us. So the main reason why I'm setting up these locations overall is that if I only leave the one top level assembly, I'm only going to have one full assembly on the top level on the mechanical side. So by setting these locations up, I can correlate them, which I can correlate components. And now when it comes to the mechanical side, multiple people can be working on that project at the same time. Now, in this case here, I'm creating brand new assemblies. In most cases, most of you folks on the call are probably existing SOLIDWORKS users. And if you are, then you can go ahead and use select an existing file, and it will actually allow you to just point to the assembly that you want to associate to, whether it's the top level or a subassembly of that as well. So I like to go ahead and create those, and I'm going to go ahead and drop those into my subassembly and kind of add a little bit more detail into my document tree. Now, one other thing I have here is the spec sheets. So one other item that I absolutely love to add to my projects are the spec sheets, because if I have a spec sheet and it's on my local machine and I go on vacation or I have to go on travel to go, do some testing out in the field, who has access to that spec sheet? Well, right now it's on my local drive, so nobody does. So what I have the ability to do is go ahead and add data files, and I've saved them to my desktop. Go and grab this guy right here. And now we can see that I have spec sheets about these particular items now embedded in here. And now my system right here, I'm on a standalone setup, but if I'm working in a network environment where I have multiple users, everybody now has access to these spec sheets that are working on this particular project. So it makes it a lot easier to go and find things like our pinouts and stuff like that that we might need for different types of power supplies, or in this case here, this uh, Allen Bradley, the 1771 IR. All right. So now that we have our document tree set up and we have certain information in there we want, just a quick look, we can also take a look at our component tree, and we can see that those locations I created, we can start adding components into each one of those locations, and it's helping us organize and stay organized right from the get-go, right when we start our project. So remember, garbage in, garbage out, right up front. We're starting to add this information to make our lives a little bit easier so we don't have to backtrack and add this stuff later on. So if you are in design like I used to be a lot, well, typically you have something like this set up on your screen where you have multiple tabs, and you have parts and spec sheets and all the different types of information that you have available. In some cases, this is actually not that many. I used to have probably 30 or 40 or different windows completely for different parts of the project. But again, our spec sheets, right? So I want to go ahead and add the information about this Amphenol connector to my software, because I need this information. I'm going to add this to my symbol when I go to add that to my schematic. So let's go ahead and take a look at the information I have here about this particular connector. I'm going to put it on my second screen so I can kind of show you what's going on in the software itself at the same time. So I'm going to go into my library tab, and I'm going to work in my manufacturer parts manager. Now, if you notice at the top, let me close this so we can kind of get a better view of this. All my libraries, they're broken out into different categories. We can see on the far left, we have our symbols manager, 2D footprints, title blocks, macros manager, which we'll get into, cables, and manufacturer parts. Why are they broken out that way? Well, one, for better organization, but for the most part, my symbols manager, my symbols that I use day to day, I don't have to have nearly as many as I might with my manufacturer parts. For example, that connector I just showed you, which is a 21 pin connector, I may only have one 21 pin connector, but I could have 50 or 100 different 21 pin connectors that are out there on the market, Amphenol and Pasternak, whoever you might be getting your connectors from. TE connectivity for another one. So you can go ahead and now have a very big manufacturer parts library and utilize the same symbols just to kind of keep some keep everything uniform within your software. So again, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to just go ahead and create a brand new part. Now, on the left-hand side, we have all the different classifications here. These are hard-coded to the software, with the exception of, you can see I have two of them here, distribution blocks and notes. Those are custom-made classifications. You can go ahead and add your own. There's certain pieces of information within these hard-coded classifications that you can change, but for the most part, this is what it is. So hopefully you can find a um, classification that will suit your needs depending on the part. So I'm going to keep it highlighted on connectors, and I'm going to go ahead and add a brand new manufacturer part. So when I first go into the manufacturer part window, it looks kind of big. There's a lot of fields in here, garbage in, garbage out, right? So the main two things that I absolutely have to have in my parts is a reference number and a manufacturer. So I'm going to go ahead real quick and copy this part number. Everybody's favorite, Control C, Control V. And I'm going to go ahead and add the name. Now, a few other additional pieces of information I might want to include in here is individual libraries. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and put user data, and it's a base component. In this case, the pins or the back shell, things that we might see on down here, all of these are accessories or auxiliary components to that, because now we can go ahead and start to build out that particular part. Same thing applies to a contactor. We may have that auxiliary block on the front, right? The main contactor is the base component, and that the auxiliary block on the front is, well, auxiliary to that contactor. And from there, we can create what's known as an electrical assembly. If you have your own internal part number, you can use article number or external ID. We can go ahead and add a description. So let me go ahead and find the actual description of this part. Again, Control C, Control V. If we have a specific symbol for this manufacturer part, we can add it here, which allows me to point directly to my symbols manager and say, all right, every time I use this symbol, I want you to use, every time we use this manufacturer part, I want you to use this specific symbol. We can also go ahead and add our height, width, depth, and some more properties about that part. We can even go in and start to add, again, we have more description fields. I've also gone ahead and I've created some customization to my manufacturer parts. I find this to be a lot more useful depending on the type of part you're working with. In this case here, based on this manufacturer part, go back to that spec sheet again. There's certain information about this part that I might deem necessary for my projects, whatever I'm working on. If you're working in aerospace, a lot of this stuff might be very important for what you're doing. So we can go ahead and customize those, and we can add additional fields that we need to carry. Again, garbage in, garbage out. And then lastly, what we need to do is we're going to add our circuit information. So based on this particular model here, I have two different size pins. I have some 16 gauge and I have 4 12 gauge contacts. And for this, what I need to do is I'm going to go ahead and add 2 circuits. And I'm going to change these to, I'll make them power male pins. Now, why am I adding this? Because you'll see in a few minutes when I get to my connection symbol, my connector symbol, there's a lot of different circuit types that we can really fine tune and really create some detail within every single one of our symbols. If you don't need to get to that level, well, you can just use terminal. That's for the most part, 90% of the time I end up using terminal. But for this, because I'm trying to show you some of the functionality within SOLIDWORKS Electrical, I'm going to go ahead and use power male pin. I can go ahead and also add information such as maybe this is power and this is going to be comms for those different groups of circuits. Now, inside of this first group here, we take a look at that spec sheet again. We've got 4 of those 12 gauge pins. So I'm going to call that the first circuit here. It may not be power, but that's what I'm going to call it for right now. So I'm going to go ahead and add my 4 pins. One thing to note about SOLIDWORKS Electrical, pin 0_000 is actually pin 1 because it's dealing with SQL, which is not access. It's a lot more robust than dealing with access. So in the case of this, based on that spec sheet, I have B, D, E, and G. So I've added those marks for those. We can also go in and add things such as what max wire number. Now I highlighted all of them because I only want 1 wire in every single one of those pins. We can add mnemonic. Maybe there's specifics about this particular pin that we want to add. And then we can go in and add information about the gauge. So based on that spec sheet, it is a 12 gauge pin. So I'm going to just type in 12 and I'm going to keep it min as 12 as well. Certain parts that you might use. Maybe you have wire ferrules or ring terminals that accept a 16 to 20 gauge wire. So you might want to put the max as 16 and the minimum as 20 gauge in there as well. The reason I'm adding this information is because when I go to generate a design rule check later on, it will spit out the right information. Hey, you've got a 14 gauge wire connected to this. Hey, it kind of gives you an alert and says, you might want to go back and double check that. So I've got my first circuit set up. So now we need to go in and we can add our second circuit, which there is, let me just double check here. I'm trying to go back and forth between my sheets. There is how many pins? 17. So I'm going to go ahead and just add 16. And let's see, I tried to do this earlier. So let's see if I can remember. A, B is used, C, D is used, E is used, F, G, H, I is never used because it looks like a 1, J, K, L, M, N, O is never used, Q is never used, P, I can remember my alphabet right now, R, S, T, U, V, W. I get it all? Let's see. Okay, that looks good. And then again, what we can do is highlight all of these. Maybe for 1 or 2 of the pins you can put 2 in there. I'm going to go ahead and say 16 for this and 16 for that. Just like that, I now have that connector built. Go back, double check, maybe add some more information. I'm not going to say it again, garbage in, garbage out. I'll try to refrain from that. I've said it enough now, but there's a lot more information you can add in here. You can also add the vendor information. So in the case of this, I do have Amphenol's site and their part number. So I'll go ahead and, I'm not Amphenol, Allied or RS Components. I've got their information in here as well. I'll drop that in. If I can spell again.
Hey, JP, we're getting a few comments here, and I'm not sure it's going to cause any concern, but PGen or P pin G was duplicated in your list.
Pin G. Oh, thank you. Look at that. See, I knew there was an X because I tried this earlier. So let me redo that. See, everybody's catching me on that. Let me redo this real quick. H, J. Oh, see, now I got to go back. H, J, K, L, M, N, P, R, S, T, U, V, W, X. I knew there was an X. I tried this earlier just to make sure because this is a lot of information here. So once you have all this information, thank you everybody who did that, by the way, calling me out. So now I've got my my pins in here, and everything looks good to me. Again, always double check, make sure you got the right information in there, and I can go ahead and say okay. And what it's going to do is it's going to add that part to my library. All right, so now I've got my manufacturer part in there. If at any point down the road I need to change information or add more information about this part, I can do this. One other thing I did not mention is I can also add that same data sheet that I just added to the project. I can also embed that spec sheet into or at least point to it, an existing folder on my computer with that spec sheet in it. All right. So now that we've got a part, one simple part in there, the base component. I did not add the pins. I'm going to try to save some time. It's the same process again for adding the pin information in there as well if we need to. But I'm going to go ahead and open up one of my schematics. Now, one of the first things I personally like to do when I open up a brand new schematic is I like to come in and double check my snap and grid spacing. So in order to get to that, I did that kind of quick. Bottom right corner of the screen, any one of these, you have grid, ortho, snap. You can right click on any one of those and it will bring up this dialog box. I like to use 1/8. And so now I have my snap and grid spacing set to 1/8. So let's go ahead and now add that manufacturer part to my schematic. Well, I have the ability to insert a symbol, and we have a 3-pin connector symbol here if we need to. Whatever the last symbol that you used is the one that is going to show up again. So like if I drop this down and I go back into the symbol manager, this same symbol will appear again. So whatever the last one I used is the next one that's going to be available. But I don't want to use the basic symbol, this hard symbol here. What I want to use is what we call our insert connector or dynamic insertion tool. And what that does is it allows me to go and filter and find a manufacturer part and build a symbol based off of that manufacturer part. So this was the one I just created. And I just added my base component. So now let's say I want to add additional parts. I just said I never added the terminal or the back shell or any type of clamp or anything. But if I had, what I would want to do is come in and go to auxiliary. I can do another search. And maybe I want to add this one. I can add it just for all intents and purposes so we can kind of see. And it's going to add a running tally of all the different parts. So these types of connectors, if you do any type of mil spec work, again, housing, pins, the back shell, maybe it's a 45 versus a 90, a piece of heat shrink, whatever it may be, now you can build that entire part up. So let's go ahead and add that. Oh, and I'm going to name it, I'll just name it J for now. And now I have my connector. Notice it started to build my connector out. And if we take a look on the left-hand side here, I have the ability to turn on or off certain sections or circuits. Now, the way this insertion tool works, it's using a configuration that's built into the software. Now, I can do things like having a zigzag, where maybe I don't want to show the entire connector. I want to break out the power versus the comms. So I can go ahead and drop that in, and then we'll automatically filter to the next circuit, and I can come in and add that one as well. Now, based on that configuration, which is built into the software, it knew that I wanted to add this particular information in here. But now at least I have all the information here. Maybe I want to put the power on one sheet, kind of like how our document tree is set up here on the left-hand side. The power on one sheet and my comms or control lines on another sheet. I can do that. If we take a look at our component tree, we can now see that I have 2 symbols associated to J1. Now I can have as many symbols as I want associated to it. So that's really nice to be able to, if I have a 50-pin connector or something like that, and some sort of DIN connector, 2 pins here, 3 pins there, 10 pins there, I can have 5, 6, 10 symbols associated to that same component. And if I make a change or information that I need to appear on all those symbols, well, I can go to the manufacturer part, add the appropriate information, and push that out to all my symbols that is out on my schematics. All right. So the next thing I'm going to do is we're going to go ahead, check my little sheet here to make sure I'm doing everything that I said I was going to talk about here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to draw a couple wires. So in order to draw some wires, we're simply going to go ahead to our schematic tab and we're going to draw a wire. Now, the first thing that comes up is a 12-volt wire. That's just the default in this particular template. But I'm going to go ahead and take a look at our wire selector. And with this particular template, now again, this is a template that comes with the software. It's very basic because so many different industries use this software that we can't build every single wire style and every type of wire that you might use. So this is where it takes some time to build this out. And this is what myself or the reseller, we can help you and guide you in the right direction on how to do this. But what we want to do is come into our wire style manager. And in here is where it lists all the different wires that are a part of this particular project. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to leave these alone. I'm not going to mess with these. We have the ability to do electrical, hydraulic, pneumatic, but I'm going to add a brand new group. I can even name that group. What I personally like to do is even think about, again, think about before you even start drawing these out, what kind of wires do we use on a daily basis? In this case here, maybe I only use 16 gauge, so I don't need to worry about adding 14 or 12 or double numbers, double zero, whatever it may be, or even down to like 30 gauge, 28 and 30 gauge. So what I like to do is personally start with my largest numbers, so like a 14 gauge, and work my way down. In this case here, I'm just going to go ahead and name this group 16 gauge. And now I have one wire style under this group. I'm going to go ahead and edit this particular wire style. So let's make this one red. I was going to do yellow, but we'll do red. So I'm just going to name it 16 AUG red. I want to make it a control line. I want to change the color of it to, well, red. Make sure I click the right button there. I also have the ability to add information about the size of this wire so that when I do get to the 3D side, this information is going to carry over into 3D. So overall, what's the diameter of this? I actually, again, back to my spec sheets, I pulled up some hookup wire here and try to figure out what is 16 gauge. So I'm going to put 0.085 in here for this particular wire style. And the gauge is 16. And the wire color for that. So again, when I get to the 3D side, that's what this is going to appear as, is a red wire. Now, if I'm dealing with something like fiber or something like a 14 gauge wire or even bigger where the bend radius really starts to take a factor, RF lines, fiber, and large gauge wire, bend radius factor or bend radius in general is something that you might want to consider, because that will help you determine the appropriate bend in the 3D space. We can also add additional information such as, what is this type of wire? So I'm just going to type in 16 gauge red again and leave it as such. One other thing that I want to show you is that you also have the ability to change the formula for your wire numbering scheme in here. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, in the case of this right now, when I go to number my wires, which we'll do at the end of this, is right now it's just going to give me a 1, 2, 3, 4. But if you work in mil spec or whatever industry you are in, well, there's usually a specific standard that you have to abide by. And in this case here, maybe I want it to be a 3-digit number, 001, 002. Or maybe I want it to have a W for wire in front of that 001. So I can add that as well. We can come in and we can also add other variables. Maybe I want to show let's see here. Let's go ahead and add the gauge. So I'm going to go ahead and add the gauge. And I'm going to also type in AUG. And I'm going to also add in the color. Now, one thing to note when you do this is that I'm not including, right now, I haven't included any spaces. So it's just going to read one long blurb, W001 16 AWG red. So in the case of this, I might want to consider adding a space in there just to make sure that I'm accounting for just a little bit extra, or maybe something like a tack mark, so we can kind of break it up so we can kind of read that a little bit better. So that's how we create our wire formula. And that's, again, this is SQL. So there's a lot you can do with this and really go down and fine tune this even more. So now I've created this red, right? So now do I have to really go through and do this all over again for yellow, black, blue, whatever other color it may be? Well, kind of. But the easiest way to do it is simply copy and then highlight the group, because if you select the red and you hit paste, it's going to create a multi-style wire. So I'm going to select group and I'm going to paste again. And now I can come in here and I just need to change basic stuff. I'll change this to blue. and blue and blue and blue, right? So I can just come down and change basic information about this, and I don't have to worry about going in and changing the formula every single time, because again, it's this equipotential formula is looking to this color blue here to get the appropriate information out. Okay, I'm not going to keep going with that. That's a lot. It's a quick gist on how to create a wire style and how I personally like to do it. But let's get into actually drawing our wires now. So let's go into here. I'm going to select my red wire, and I'll just draw a couple segments, and I'll add that blue wire as well. And we'll just do these three. Great. So I've got my wire segments. So I'm going to go ahead and let's connect this up to something, but I'm going to actually go ahead and connect it to another page. So we need some other information on this sheet here, and I'm going to just, without even thinking about what my circuit's really doing and the functionality behind the circuit itself, I'm going to go ahead and add a PLC. So inside my project, I have a PLC manager for this particular project, and I can start to add information about maybe a rack that I'm adding to this. So I'm going to go ahead and find a new PLC that I want to add. I'll grab this guy. Some of these parts are already they're defaulted in your software when you first install first install SolidWorks Electrical as well. So now that I've got this PLC in here, I'm going to go ahead and insert this PLC. And I have the ability to, again, just like I did with the dynamic connector, I can turn on or off certain circuits, and we get that slashed line at the bottom to show us that we still have a connection. There's still more to this PLC than what's being shown here. For all intents and purposes, I'm going to go ahead and just show the whole thing. We can also flip it around, and maybe we want to go this way with it. And that looks like a good spot to drop that into place. Now, how did it create this? Well, based on what we call, and I said this earlier about the connector as well, there are configurations in the software that allow me to define the shape and the size and how these look going forward. So in the case of this, I can really fine tune the size and what I want my PLC to look like with all the different channels and the combs between them. But again, this is being generated based off of the manufacturer part. So let's go ahead and I'm going to draw some more wires to kind of match what we just did on the other side. And we've got 3 wires just like we did on the other sheet. Now, how do we hook these together? Well, hooking them together is quite simple. We have what is called our origin destination arrow manager. And we can see here very quickly, I've got my connector to my PLC. In reality, is this going to be a very interesting circuit I'm building here, but I think the functionality is really what matters in this case. So I'm going to go ahead and add a single insertion. And we notice as soon as I go to select this, it only allows me to select the same wire style. So if I zoom in really close and try to connect to this blue one, it does not let me do that because the properties, the information about this wire is not the same. So it's not going to let me connect to it, which is a nice little design rule check. If you're ever trying to race to get a project done, it kind of helps stop that from happening. So I'm going to go ahead and connect those two up like so. All right, and I've got my wires. Simple double click will take me to the opposing page. So now I can just double click on these and it will go from point A to point B. The nice thing with these are also hyperlinked in a PDF. So when you export your project to a PDF later on, rather than having to print out that giant 11 by 17 book to bring out in the field, if you have the ability to have a ruggedized iPad, now you can just simply double tap those arrows and it will take you to that next page very quickly. So let's take this a little bit further. Maybe I don't want to have just wires connected to this. Maybe I want a cable associated to this. Or maybe more importantly, maybe I have terminals between that connector and this PLC because the connector is out in the field, out in the warehouse or wherever we're working. So I'm going to go ahead and use the N, what's called the N terminals or insert terminals feature. And what I can do here is simply select this symbol, which is the default symbol, and I'm going to go ahead and draw this line from top to bottom, left to right. And what this does is it allows me to determine what side I want pin 1 to be on, and I can create a terminal block. Here you can come in and define, maybe instead of X, which is the default, I want it to be TB, which by the way is you can change in the software itself. Most times I use TB, but for whatever reason the default is X. So I've just created a terminal block. Great. I still have wires coming out of this going to this. Now inside of a cabinet, this might not be a big deal, but let's go ahead and I'm going to show you how to do a cable anyway. So all we need to do is highlight. One thing to note too, if you highlight left to right and try to select, it's not going to select it unless the entire item, whatever you have selected, is inside of that bounding box. But left to right, right to left, anything touching that box will get selected. So a simple right click after it's highlighted, a simple right click and associate cable cores will open up our cable manager for this particular project. We can see that the wires I selected are at the bottom. But we need to add a new cable. I didn't add any cables to this project yet. So the cable manager, which is just like my manufacturer part library, I'm going to go ahead and find a manufacturer part that I want to use for this. I'm going to go ahead and search based off of the different types of how many conductors I have. And let's choose, sure, this one looks okay. So I have this one here. I've got my 3 wires. I got these and associate. And just like that, I now have a cable. So let's do the same thing to the other side. Associate cable cores. We will find another cable. Pick a different one. Here we go. Let's try this one. And I'll pick these 3 and associate. And just like that, I now have cable 1 and cable 2. The way I like to describe how the wires work and the cables, I can draw all my wires out. Let's say I have, you don't have to all the time, but maybe I have an Ethernet line. There's 8 wires, right? There's the 4 twisted pairs. Well, I'm going to draw those out because in some of the instances I used to work with, I used to have to bifurcate those or maybe open that up and 2 pair went one way and 2 pair went the other way, depending on what I was using that for. So in the case of that, I drew all my wires out and then I'm using my air quotes, you can't see me, but I administratively turned those 8 wires into a cable in the same way I just did these by simply highlighting them and administratively turning them into a cable. If I disassociate these, they will be wires again. But right now the software is recognizing these as cables. So why did I do that? If we come back over here to our other sheet, we notice that those wires now turn to cable as well because it's connected to this connector. So why did I do that? Well, I wanted to show you this feature with our terminal blocks where we can come in and we can actually draw and create a different view of that terminal block. So if you notice on the left-hand side, as soon as I hit OK here, there's going to be a new sheet that appears in our document tree. And this is ultimately the goal that I'm trying to get to with this, is a graphic representation of that terminal block without having to hand somebody the schematic book and say, here, figure it out. Now they have a graphic view of terminal block 1, terminal 1, 2, and 3, each of the wires coming out of that terminal, turning into a cable, in this case W1, the information about that cable, the other end going back to 321 and into that PLC, into the appropriate pins of 16, 17, 18. And this works for your power supplies, for your circuit breakers, for your contactors, whatever it may be. It will give the appropriate information on each side. If you have just wires connected to it, it will just give you a little pigtail minus all of this information. It will essentially just show the 3 wires here instead connected to it. So now that we've got our PLC with a terminal block connected here and even our connector, maybe we want to use this circuit. Maybe we use this PLC all the time. Maybe on every project we use, we use this particular PLC. We like using it. We're comfortable with it. We know how to program everything with it. So let's go ahead and keep this circuit together. And those same wire types come out of it. Maybe there's, depending on the brand, you have a connector, an accessory connector that you have to add to that PLC that always has to be used with it. So there could be a lot of different manufacturer parts associated to this circuit here, this small circuit. Well, what we can use is what's called macros. And in this case here, I'm going to go ahead and highlight everything, and I'm going to go ahead and simply drag it and drop it over into what is called our macros palette. I can give it a fancy name. I can put it in a specific library. And now the next time I need it, I can simply drag and drop that in. There's no other end of the circuit, so it drops the origin destination arrows. I have to reassociate those. But notice now I have PLC 2. And I have in this project anyway, I have W3 and W4. So it's adding more to this particular project. I'm building my bill of materials without having to go through and copy paste and make sure that every single part is added. The other part of this is that after I create this macro, the first time I create this macro, it is now being added to my macros library. It's going to be fun trying to find it in here because I've got a lot of different macros that I've built over the time here. Let's see if I can find it real quick. But what it is building, here it is. So it's building that circuit and putting it into my collaborative server that everybody on my team has access to. So if I am in charge of the input power circuit with the input connector and the EMI filter and the ground stud, and if I want to show it, and all the ring terminals and everything associated to it, and the actual power supply and the Molex connectors associated, whatever it is, I can build a macro, put it in there, and as soon as I create that, it is now available for somebody else to reuse in another project right then and there with all of that information in there. So I don't have to go and, hey, what was that project that you built that entire circuit? I need to copy it out and bring it into this one and whatever else. It's there. It's ready for you to use right away. So now that we've done our macro, I'll go ahead and delete this guy. We don't really need him in the project. We can go ahead and take a look at all of our different pieces of information here, and we have the ability to number our wires. So in order to number our wires, we're simply going to go ahead and say number new wires, say yes, and it's creating that wire number, that formula that we just used and created, and it's adding that to every single one of these as necessary. So we can see here that it's W001, 02, and because this is blue, which is just part of the formula, if you want this to be 3, we just have to change that. But for all intents and purposes, you can kind of see, based on that formula that I created very quickly, that we have a wire numbering scheme for this. Once we have all that information done and we've added all this information to our schematic and our project, now we can come in and maybe we want to go ahead and generate our reports. So in the case of our reports, in this project, I don't have a lot of parts in here, but in reality, if I were going to take a week or two to try to build this all out, I'd have probably a couple hundred parts in here. We can get a quick idea of what is going to be in our bill of materials. The nice thing from this project, that this report manager, is I don't even have to add it to the project yet. I can export this to Excel, a text file, an XML. That way, maybe I need to give to my logistics team, or I need to at least get a printout of all the parts I currently have. That way I can start getting certain things on order because of lead times and whatever else, right? So at least I have that ability. Maybe there's other information about these reports that I want to add to this particular report. If that's the case, I would want to come in and edit the configuration, this report, the bill of materials configuration, and I can go ahead and find another field. Maybe, remember we added the allied connector and its symbol. There should be a vendor or supplier and their part number. We can go and add those fields to this. And if you are very good, if you are strong in SQL, then you have the ability to go into expert mode. I am not going to cover expert mode. This is starting from scratch, and this is more of an advanced feature. And if you want to know more about that, please reach out to us. Please reach out to your value-added reseller. They will gladly go through and help you understand a little bit more about what expert mode is and editing the queries that pull this information to generate the appropriate report. Okay, so now we can see we have our quantity, we have our supplier, we have some part numbers, which I don't think I added the part number in here. And then we have our wire styles, our cables, because we have cables now, and we have our drawing list. So I'm going to go ahead and generate those. And I'm letting the software do everything for me. Everything that I put into the software is going to be pulled out and added to my bill of materials. There were no wires because remember I turned them into cables, so therefore it didn't generate a wire report. Taking a quick look at our bill of materials, it would take a little bit more setting up with the configuration based on the title block that I'm using. One thing I will note is that title block and template are not the same thing in SOLIDWORKS Electrical. A title block is what you see here graphically. A template, which we're going to do in just a second, is incorporating all of this information into a new, essentially, start for the next project. So if I wanted to, I can go ahead and manipulate and edit these fields and shrink them down. I don't think I need to have this field so big. Maybe I'm using a vertical sheet instead for my report, and maybe I want to shrink these down even smaller. So just graphically, I have to go in and I would want to just edit this a little bit. We can also take a look at our cables that we used for this project. We get our to from information, maybe the description from the cable, what kind of cable it is directly. And if we connected to the 3D side for wires and cables, we can capture a length. One thing I will note also, if you are running wires, you can go ahead and you have to route in 3D in order to capture the link. If you are routing a cable, you can go ahead and inside your cables for this type of project here, let me go to properties, and you can actually type in a length here manually. Maybe it's an off-the-shelf cable, a 3-foot or 3-meter cable that you have. You can type that in, and that will override what you've recorded in the route. All right. So now that we've got all this information, we've gone through all the different configurations, our project configurations. What do we want our text to look like? What do we want our symbols to look like graphically? What do we want our little dots on our wires to look like? All the connection points. We've gone through our PLC configurations, connector configurations, everything, which you don't have to do all of them right up front, but we can at least start with a few of them. Now we're ready to come in and we can go ahead and create a template from this particular project. The one thing I will have to do is you actually do have to close the current project in order to create a template. And I'll go ahead, save as template, start from scratch. What's today? Today is 10/20/20. What it's going to do is grab everything we added to that project and it's going to turn into a template. So maybe there's an entire circuit that you use every time, kind of like the macros, but it's always guaranteed to be there, or the notes page that you have in every beginning of your project, or you have a certain drawing list style that you want to incorporate in every single one of your projects. You can take all of those, add that to the template, and you don't even have to think about it anymore. It's being added right off the bat every time you start. Now we could take a look at my where it's stored in my program data folder, and we can see that that new template has been added. If I go to new, we can see that starts from scratch is now available for our next project. So that was a lot of information that I just covered, a lot of information over the past hour there. Let me go back to this guy here. There's supposed to be images there, but I guess they didn't show up correctly. I guess I had my timing messed up on that. But over the last few minutes, we just covered the starting from scratch, adding adding information, using that garbage in, garbage out mentality, using some of the intelligent functionality, our terminal blocks, our report manager in the macros, which is definitely one of my favorite features. I don't want to have to recreate everything every single time. And then, of course, looking at the reports at the end there. So with that said, the one of the major things is the increase in communication and collaboration, not just between the electrical and mechanical space, but I've noticed it a lot more, even just between electrical engineers, that you're utilizing this and you're creating a lot more value and being able to work closer together in the same project. You're increasing your productivity and your time to market. You're also going in and have consistent manufacturing and assembly and eliminating a lot of hidden costs, which allows you to overall streamline that development. So next time, November 17th, mark that down. You'll see some marketing material coming out over the next month here. Is the continuation of this. My counterpart, who's on the back end, who's probably been answering questions like crazy, he's going to be doing this, and he's going to be talking about how we're connecting this to the 3D side and starting the right way from scratch on the 3D side. So with that said, Thomas, if you want to unmute yourself, if you got a couple questions or some comments or anything like that you want to talk about.
Yeah, definitely a lot of questions. So thank you, everybody for keeping those rolling. I answered as many as I could. Let me pull up some of my answered ones that I think would be good for the group. So, a couple questions came through about the macros, and users were questioning are curious how, editing the macro at a later time would impact drawings and projects that utilize the macro in its existing state. Would you like to touch base on that real quick?
Sure. So it does not. If you have a project, let me go to. I'll open this guy back up. If I add that macro in, so what I recommend doing when you're working with your macros is, let's say I have this particular symbol here and whatever else, or a circuit, and I want to turn it into a macro, and this is how I want it to look every time, but then there's a change, right? So I would recommend you can go in and keep this one, leave this one alone, because again, that's a finalized schematic. That's a finalized circuit, an approved circuit that you're allowed to use. But you do have the ability to copy that in your library and create a new one, or maybe change the manufacturer part, or add, maybe change the back shell from a straight to a 45 or something like that, or a 90. You can go ahead and do that as well. You have that ability. Um, those macros are not connected, not specifically connected to any existing project that you already have. So it's essentially a pulling out a static image of that so you can reuse it. And it's because of those old projects that might be finalized and approved, that's why it's disconnected. So that way it doesn't go in and mess with those older projects. Sounds like you're still
All
typing
right.
away in there.
Well, oh yeah. I'm gonna have to go get some ice and some heating for my hands after this. But yeah, I know we're extremely tight, guys. We did, get a ton of questions, but I think it would be best possibly to follow up, or you're the call if you want to keep shooting some of these out.
Give me one or
It's
two
up to
more
you.
here.
A lot of people are okay. Let's see. Does SolidWorks? Let's see. Never mind. That was when I answered. Can you use rung numbering and associate wire numbers to a rung number?
So you can set up this title block might not be the best one because there's no numbering scheme on the side. Let me see here. I've got a couple in here. Where's my vertical one? Nope, not that one. 1 second. You can, right? So the way you can set it up is inside the project. You have the ability to change the row. You can utilize these fields here for your wire numbering scheme as well. So based off of that, off the sheet, now setting up the rung is another step on top of that you have to set up in that wire formula scheme for those wire styles that you want to be on that rung. That almost that ladder logic look, right? So yeah, it's just a matter of pulling the appropriate information from various parts of the software to be able to create the formula to create the correct wire numbering scheme that you want. I was trying to find the appropriate title block. I know I've got a couple in here. I just don't remember which ones I've
Yeah.
used.
But yeah, it's definitely possible, as JP stated, and it's just a matter of pulling in the variables, changing the project to look for that rung number based off of the properties you specified in your title block, and we can tag based off of that. One last question: in the manufacturer's part entry, can you show how we can add a custom symbol for the part? And so I assume what that question there is going to lead to, in the manufacturer's part, can you show how to associate, or did you show how to associate the 2D representation?
I did not.
Because I
I,
do
I
not
talked
feel
about
like
it for
we're
a
going to have
second, but
time
I
to
did
show
not
a custom.
actually go in to do it. So if I want to, so let's find that connector I just created. And this applies to every symbol that we have. So let me go to Amphenol, find this pin. So down here in the illustration section here, I can actually go ahead and assign a line diagram symbol to it. So in this case here, I don't have the exact, I don't have that exact model, an image of that model. What I personally like to do is get which you can download from Amphenol directly, is the 3D model, and then take a screenshot of that to pull into the line diagram. So it looks kind of like these. There are a few default, just generic, simple plugs. So I can go ahead and select that one. If there's a schematic symbol that I want to use every single time for this, well, you can go in and utilize, in this case, it's a 21 pin. I don't think I have a 21 pin connector symbol. Doesn't mean I can't make one. But let's say it's 21 pins. So let's say 7. So I can break it up at least 3 times, right? So I can go ahead and choose that one. And then the 3D model, which I have in here somewhere, I believe. I think I downloaded it. Amphenol, there it is. So I can go ahead and point to that particular model. If it's a 2D footprint, same thing applies. It's kind of like, it's not the same as line diagram. It's going to give me a 2D footprint, like more of a cabinet view. A connection label as well. So maybe I want to get a small table that I can drop onto my schematic sheet that includes all the pinouts and just give me a table. The nice thing about connection labels is that if I change the wires in my schematic at all, that will also reflect in that connection table that is associated to this particular connector. So those are the few different options you can have to associate these to it. Now, that's one way to add to this. I know I'm getting off a little tangent here. I'll go ahead and save that. Now, let's say I want to, that same 7-pin connector that we just used in that symbol, I believe it was the other one. I'll just pick this one. We also have the ability to define the actual manufacturer part in the symbol. So maybe it's like a Allen Bradley VFD, right? Any one of those really super whammadine, very custom parts. And I have a symbol that looks just like that particular part. I can go ahead and open that symbol and say, okay, every time I use this symbol, I know it's a, what's the numbers off the top of my head? 525, 527, the VFDs. It's been a while since I've used them. I can't
Yeah,
remember
yeah.
off the top of my head, right? So I can go ahead and call out and say, all right, I want it to be the Allen Bradley, and then find the part itself and call that out. I might actually have it in here. Um, doesn't make sense to use a connector for a VFD, but we get the idea. So there's, but you can go the other direction as well. You have that ability.
All
So
right. Well, perfect. Well, we got a lot of questions. For those of you who we couldn't answer your questions, we will definitely follow up.
absolutely. So that I want to say everybody who there's, I can see, I'm trying to read through the questions here at the same time here. Holy cow. Thank you for asking these questions. I love when we get actual audience feedback. Kind of stinks on my end when you don't get a lot of people. They just kind of sit there and they leave without saying anything. Um, but thanks again for watching. We will get back to you if we didn't answer your question. If you would like to see more information, please reach out to us. Please reach out and to your value added reseller, and also go to solidworks.com. I believe it's /electrical, and you can take a look at a little bit more and download. I think they have a couple like download brochures and stuff like that as well. So thanks again. And I appreciate your time and have a great day. Stay safe, everybody.